We do have a good panel here so far. We've got Congressman Jeff Miller, who's chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, a veteran herself, Scott Perry also, both who are co-chair of the post 9/11 Veterans Caucus. And our moderator will be Molly O'Toole, our politics reporter, who covers the Hill mostly for us at Defense One. Again, you know, on the Hill last year, this was an easy sell because we had a veterans scandal, and like Leo said, you had a lot of people who probably don't talk much about Veterans Affairs, so they have something to say because it's Capitol Hill. But you have a couple different classes of people who pay attention or have some sort of oversight role in national security on Capitol Hill. And you have those who are on the committees that matter, the Armed Services Committee, the Veteran Affairs Committee. And you have a new wave of actual veterans from the wars who have their own experience. And I once was told, yeah, you know, but veterans or members of Congress doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about with policy when it comes to it. That's a learning curve, but I think we'll have some people that know what they're talking about here. So if you're ready, come on up, please.
Okay, thanks.
Let's welcome our panel, members of Congress. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. Okay, no sudden movements. I think we're all right. Thank you again. Thank you for waiting. We obviously, you've noticed we swapped the order a little here, but I think this is an important follow-up to the panel that we just had. They don't need much of an introduction, but I'll give a very brief one. To my left, obviously, we have Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat from Hawaii. She's also part of the House Armed Services Committee, recently founded the post 9/11 Veterans Caucus, with her fellow chairman here, all the way over here, Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania. And of course, in the middle, we have Congressman Jeff Miller, a Republican from Florida, chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. And I thought, following up from the panel we just had, it would be important, not only with the topic of our panel here, Congress's scorecard when it comes to VA oversight, but to sort of compare where we were about a year ago. We have the fallout from the VA weight scandal. We have a new VA secretary, and we've seen some improvements, as Leo Shane noted, in terms of the disability backlog, in terms of some other ways to measure progress on veterans, but we also have seen continued scandals. We haven't seen a lot of accountability when it comes to responsibility for the weight log scandal. And we've also seen recent cost overruns at the Denver VA, for example. There's an investigation into perhaps inappropriate use of relocation, the relocation process. So I wanted to ask you sort of what grade would you give Congress when it comes to oversight of the VA, and also what are some of the greatest challenges you think to really doing your job when it comes to oversight of the VA? And anyone can just sort of jump in. Do you want to start, Tulsi?
I think giving an arbitrary letter grade doesn't really give the problem justice. I think there's no question that the systemic nature of the problem that exists within the VA still requires tremendous oversight and work from Congress, but especially from the VA itself. You've mentioned some of the challenges that still exist with regards to accountability in particular. This is occurring not only within the healthcare portion, but also within benefits, within IT, within the VA's ability to outreach and actually provide service to veterans who are out there. I think there are still a tremendous number of veterans who are not aware of the benefits that they have earned, nor are they aware of the VA facilities and the services that are offered in their communities. We passed the Veterans Choice Act, which I'm sure the chairman will talk about, last year in the hopes of trying to address some of the immediate problems that we've seen with the backlog and the weight of healthcare. But again, this goes to implementation, where we've seen still many problems with the implementation of this. And unfortunately, we're still hearing from veterans within our communities who are not able to find that care in their community within that short period of time, as was the intent of the legislation.
And Chairman, could you jump off on that? I mean, obviously, there was legislation that was passed sort of in the immediate wake of the scandals, but sort of the question that you'll hear from people on the ground, so to speak, even out on the campaign trail, constituents who say, okay, yes, these massive reform bills were passed, but we haven't seen progress? Is this a communication issue where you haven't been able to communicate to the public the success you've had, or is it an implementation challenge? In which case, what tools does Congress need for that effective oversight?
First of all, I think it's very important that I take exception with Rykoff's comment that the HVAC is not a sexy committee. Rykoff and sexy, they don't jive. Look, as Tulsi said, giving an arbitrary grade is not appropriate. If you had to, you'd say it's incomplete, because Congress will always be doing its constitutional responsibility of oversight. We were very cautious when the Choice Act was being passed, especially when Secretary Shinseki was stepping down and Bob McDonnell was coming forward. This is not going to be solved in the immediate future. This has been decades in the making. There's a culture within the VA that will not change overnight. The Choice Act is a great first step. If you would have told me 30 days before we passed the Choice Act that Bernie Sanders was going to agree to allow any veteran to go outside a government-run healthcare system, I'd have said you were nuts. But we both understood that the only way to start the process of changing the way VA did business was to give the veteran the choice, empower them with making the decision with their feet, whether they wanted to go to the VA. It's easy to say that veterans, by and large, choose the VA because it is the best health care that they can get. Well, dig in a little bit deeper. Is it because VA doesn't charge copays? Is it because of the mileage difference that they can go there? We think that, and I do, that the veteran needs to be empowered with making the decision as to where they get their health care, and that's why the Choice Act is that first step. Lots of bumps in the road. I mean, we are all forgetting that this thing has only been around since December. So it is still a new, voluminous program that is being rolled out as we speak.
You mentioned some of the surprise that you had with Senator Sanders. I know you worked very closely with the senators on their committee, also across the aisle, to sort of get some of this reform legislation underway. Let's talk about another sort of tension when it comes to ways moving forward to resolve some of the continued problems at the VA, and I want to talk to you about this Congressman. There also seems to be differences of opinion in terms of accountability. There's concern on one side that if you try and empower more managers at the VA to essentially have firing power, have greater firing power, people might be sort of punished and discouraged from coming forward about problems at the VA. On the other hand, a lot of people want to see more accountability, to see someone held responsible for the continued challenges at the VA. So how do you sort of strike the right balance on accountability?
Well, I think it's kind of one of those, I hate to use the cliche, but a moving target. And I think the chairman's right. These problems are decades in the making, and it's not going to turn around just on a dime. It's just going to take step upon step, and building upon success and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But certainly for people that have worked in the private sector, we understand that government, and especially an organization this size, is not quite the same. However, many of the principles that are used and effective in the private sector can be used in the VA and a government organization this size. And for people like me, I don't understand where the only person that has the authority to remove somebody for certainly some kind of bad behavior that's maybe just poor judgment, to all the way to almost a criminal behavior, including criminal behavior. The only person that can do that is a secretary. That's ludicrous. I mean, Kmart, if you're going to pick just some random corporation, or any Walmart or any of them, it's not the CEO who's making hiring and firing decisions or disciplinary decisions at the store level. There's a store manager, and there's probably, I would imagine, different level of managers within that enterprise that can take those disciplinary actions. And it seems plausible, reasonable to most people in the country, and veterans included, that accountability needs to be pushed down. But again, this is decades in the making, and so it's not going to happen overnight. I will tell you that I would agree as well that assigning a letter grade, I think, is not indicative of Congress's oversight. I think I kind of parse it in two ways. I think that Congress has done a fairly good job of being aware of the situation and having the will and the interest to find solutions. Each of us have constituents coming in, I would imagine, on a daily, if not weekly basis with issues regarding the VA that are very particular and are valid. So we're aware and we're interested in fixing it. So I think that is, I don't know what grade you would give us for that, but of course, as Americans, we demand results, and we should. Right. And that's where I would say that we probably haven't performed to the level of expectation. But that's the expectation based on what we live with in our normal lives, where we see a problem, you find a solution, you go enact the solution, and you move on. This is the Congress. This is competing interest and competing viewpoints, and it is difficult to find consensus. I will tell you that I told the chairman, and he might remember the conversation, he might not. When we move forward on the Choice Act, I said, Chairman, this is a great first step. Please don't tell me this is the last one, because we've got a long, long way to go. And I think most people in the country, and certainly veterans, know that acutely.
Right, and thank you for joining us here, Senator Blumenthal. My prompt about giving a letter grade on Congress's progress was not very popular, but another way to potentially measure progress is looking at communities within the veterans community, sort of sub-communities, that the VA has struggled with, that didn't traditionally think about these groups when looking at veterans care. We're talking about women veterans, we're even talking about family support, and an important and ever-growing constituency within this community is going to be post-9/11 veterans. Obviously, you both are still continuing your service here, but I'm also interested in the Senator and the Chairman, in your perspective on this. What do you think are some of the unique needs for this new community, sort of looking forward when it comes to veterans care as we draw down, as they come home, or continue their service? Sort of looking ahead, what are some of the unique needs? What are the ways that you think the VA really needs to adapt and improve when it comes to this new generation of veterans?
That is really an absolutely critical question, and I want to apologize that I'm going to be here only briefly because, as a matter of fact, we have a hearing at 10 a.m. this morning on toxic exposure. Veterans' exposure to toxic substances. Talk about new challenges. This one is really very old in terms of the way it has impacted men and women who serve, going back to World War II or Vietnam with Agent Orange, or more recently, some of the mustard gases and so forth on the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan, often denied, literally denied by our military. No, we didn't suffer anything out there. And so organizations like the IAVA and the other veteran service organizations have raised these issues to the forefront. Mental health care. Again, for so many years, not so much denied as perhaps belittled or ignored. Now again, the IAVA and other VSOs bringing them forward and saying to the VA, you can no longer regard mental health issues as somehow less important. You can no longer stigmatize them, as happened in the military for so many years. And as a result, post-traumatic stress and even traumatic brain injury were somewhat disregarded or given less important status than they deserve. Now the military, and I serve on the Armed Services Committee as well as being the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, the military, to its credit, is recognizing these issues, coming to the fore, again, because of the great work by the IAVA and other VSOs. Mental health, toxic exposures, suicide, the Clay Hunt Veteran Suicide Prevention Bill, a tremendous credit to this organization. I was very proud to work on it with my colleague John McCain, as well as Chairman Miller was a tremendous contributor to this effort. One of my proudest days in the United States Senate was to go to the White House when the President signed the bill and stand with Paul Rykoff and other members of the IAVA and Clay Hunt's mom, Susan Selke, who worked so hard and so tirelessly. Veterans' families deserve tremendous credit for focusing the VA on the challenges that are coming in the future. And of course, 22 veterans every day in our country, the strongest, best country in the history of the world, 22 veterans every day commit suicide. One of them was a very good friend of mine, Justin Eldridge from southeastern Connecticut, and his widow was in the audience in the East Room when the president signed that bill, and I stood next to John McCain and Susan Selke as President Obama signed that bill. So mental health care, toxic exposure, other kinds of specialties where the VA has to be ahead of the curve. And we talk a lot about accountability. The Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Bill, we've been discussing it here, demands accountability, but obviously the challenge of the future is to hire the best docs, the best administrators, the best managers, so we avoid what happened in Phoenix, but more positively, build an organization that is truly world-class and worthy of our veterans. So the management challenge of the future. How does the VA attract talent in the medical professions?
Right.
We have a shortage of primary care doctors. We have a shortage of many specialties. How's the VA attract and keep those really excellent doctors and providers, medical care providers, the nurses and others who really make the VA what should be the best in the country?
I want to continue on the Senator's theme there of the challenge of the future when it comes to veterans care, not just necessarily within the Veterans Administration, but within our policy toward veterans as well. And I want to go off of that with Congresswoman here and with Congressman Perry. Regarding the challenge of the future, can you talk a little bit about the new generations of veterans that are emerging? Obviously, we have problems, old and new, continued problems, but talk about that challenge of the future with these this emerging
Well, it was mentioned
generation.
here, women.
Right.
Right? I'll just give you in microcosm the challenge. Just one small example. The West Haven Hospital, a number of you have probably visited it, provides good care. Most veterans are happy with it. It's experienced its challenges over the years. One of them is rebuilding an outdated physical plant. And that physical plant, for many years, has had no women's clinic, virtually no women's clinic, a little space down in the basement. Well, it's now providing a clinic. In effect, opening a new area of care with all the specialties that male veterans wouldn't need, but women do.
Right. Congresswoman, do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, I think, many of the challenges that the senator spoke about, exposure to toxic substances, post-traumatic stress, while these are issues that have affected veterans of previous conflicts, these are also issues that are affecting veterans of current conflicts. I can tell you during my deployment to Iraq in 2005, I had a lot of friends in my unit who had to pull security around a burn pit that was located on our camp. And now slowly we're starting to hear more and more about the health effects of those who literally stood next to this burn pit of toxic substances for the year-long deployment that they were in Iraq. The information that they're getting, I can tell you, is not enough. And their ability to know exactly where to go and how to document whatever health issues they may have are still insufficient. When you look at post-traumatic stress, you look at how technology has allowed more of our service members to come home, but it has also brought on a higher number of those dealing with whether major burns, the need for prosthetic limbs,
Right.
Other injuries that they incurred that in previous conflicts people would not have survived. So I think it's recognizing the similarities between veterans of these different generations, but recognizing in this day and age also how do we deliver those services in a way that connects with this post 9/11 generation of veterans. I think I think we've all read the New York Times story documenting the Marine Corps' Lost Battalion, Clay Hunt's battalion, and how this group of veterans who have lost 13 of their brothers to suicide after they've come home, in absence of a VA that provided service to them, where they felt they could talk to someone who understood and connected with their experience, they've turned to each other. They've started this Google Doc, and they have this kind of 911 call where people can go and whoever's closest can go and help provide that support directly to each other. So I think it's a matter of seeing in this day and age, these are age-old issues, but how do we best provide these services using technology and the advantages that it provides, and the larger community of veterans as a whole, to make sure that the support is there for those who need it, especially in those dire moments.
Right, and Congressman, I want to come back to you and finish with you, Chairman, but can you talk a little bit also about how your military experience, post 9/11 veteran, or excuse me, served post 9/11, you continue to serve. Can you talk about how that experience informs sort of your priorities in Congress, and how you think that that can contribute to a more awareness of some of these newer issues, this future challenge?
Well, I think me in particular, I'm a little younger than some of the people that I served with, and I think that we have a different perception of what care is and what it should be, specifically for the veteran and some of the VSOs. Even with that, we have a myriad of VSOs that we didn't have before. When I was growing up, you had the Legion, you might have had AMVETS, and you had the VFW. Now, I can't count the number of, whether it's Paralyzed Veterans for America or the folks that are sponsoring this forum, there are a lot of them, and they kind of, they tailor, in often cases, what advocacy they're interested in, which I think is a good thing, but it can also present its own challenges. And for instance, we had a group come in the office just last week that advocated for, they didn't like the choice situation. They want all veterans, and this is a VSO, they want all veterans to go to the VA facility and not anywhere else, where someone of my generation, I don't want to drive 80 miles. I want the care, and I want the care for the veteran, and I want the veteran to have the choice and be taken care of. And to me, that's the optimal situation. But somebody like Chairman Miller has to navigate those differences, and we got to come to some consensus and a conclusion where we can put it into policy, get it downrange, get a signature on it, and make the effect. The other thing is that I think that, especially for post 9/11 veterans, and maybe just anybody in the modern age, we have an expectation of things being better, having capabilities that before were unseen and unknown. And Tulsi's talked about people surviving now where they wouldn't have in the past. But we have expectations based on technology of what our capabilities are and what they should be. And I think the VA is going to struggle to keep up. And I think that that's one of the things that Chairman and this committee is going to have to focus on and be aware of, because I think it's hard to keep up with the cost. It's hard to keep up with technology, but veterans are going to see it and they're going to demand it.
Right.
And they should.
That's a great transition, and I want to wrap up here with the Senator and with the Chairman. Can you talk about, obviously there are continued challenges with the VA that we have to stay vigilant about, but how we meet those continued challenges while also staying responsive and staying adapted to some of these new challenges that are emerging with a whole new generation of veterans. How do you weigh those two things, the continued vigilance and responsiveness, immediacy?
Well, first of all, we cannot continue to do things the way we've always done them just because this is the way we've always done it. Dick just said, and I agree with him, it's very important to be able to go out and recruit and retain quality physicians and healthcare workers. But guess what? If they can't or won't do their job, you got to be able to fire them too. And you can't do that within this federal government. You can't do it in the VA. Only 3 people have been held accountable for the wait time debacle that has taken place. Nobody has been held accountable for the egregious problem in Aurora or Denver, Colorado with the construction of a hospital. We are about to do something now that I do not think we should do, and that is to give VA carte blanche to finish that project of $625 million. But we're going to do it because the Senate passed, and I'm not casting aspersion on my colleague over here, the Senate passed by unanimous consent a bill that said, we'll take VA's word for where the money's coming from for this $625 million. They're using fake offsets in order to do it, so they're doing business as usual to fix a problem that they created. And so all of these things, as Scott has said, as Tulsi has said, as Dick has said, there is a myriad of problems that still exist at the VA. You've got a person at the helm in Bob McDonnell that understands the problems, is trying to fix it, but I promise you, the culture within VA is stronger than the secretary is. And it's going to take some forward leaning in order to change what's going on there.
Senator, do you want to respond to that?
As a prosecutor, I always like doing rebuttal. But actually, Chairman Miller and I are in agreement on what he just said. Accountability requires the ability to, in effect, discipline. Not only hiring, but firing. And we are working on a bill, which I hope will have a bipartisan coalition behind it, that will enable the VA to act more swiftly and surely in personnel. And just as a parenthetical here, as a prosecutor, I believe very strongly in accountability and criminal accountability. And from day one, I have called on the Department of Justice, not the IG of the VA, but the Department of Justice to do a criminal investigation of the wrongdoing at Phoenix and elsewhere in the VA in connection with the doctoring of records, cooking books, in effect, making false statements to the federal government, which could have subjected managers to criminal liability and may still. So we are completely in accord on that point. And enabling the VA to have greater control over its personnel when there are mistakes is very, very important. But here's what's also important. The VA cannot fire its way out of its current problem. In other words, firing people is not the only solution here. It has to also attract and retain really good people. And so the challenge is not only to reform the personnel process to enable swifter and surer discipline, but also to make it a place where people, the best people, whether they are doctors or administrators, and we haven't talked here about disability claims, still a problem. We haven't talked about homelessness, still a problem. We haven't talked about a number of other issues that affect our veterans where the nation is failing to keep faith. It isn't all the VA. We can use the VA as a target here, but there are a lot of really good people. The majority of people who work at the VA are really good, hardworking, dedicated people who need better guidance and leadership. And so I think it's like any corporation. I was sitting yesterday with the head, a number of the higher officials of a major corporation and talking to them about how they attract people. Well, they don't attract the best people by simply firing the worst. They also have to provide incentives and rewards. And we know people don't go to work for the VA for the money. It's a psychic reward. It's the knowledge that you're helping our nation's heroes, literally our nation's heroes, that you're making a difference in their lives. And the more we can attract the best people in the nation to do those jobs, healthcare, disability claims, management, the better our system will be. And so firing is one antidote, but it's not the only one.
Obviously, we have a diverse array of opinions and experiences here, a lot of work left to do, and I know our audience here will be keeping score. So thank you so much all for your time. And